First, we'll see what the Sunday papers are covering, or more accurately, what stories have developed since the Sunday papers, George. Tony Abbott has visited Afghanistan.
And he's had 10 hours, and most of them with the troops. And now he's on his way to Dubai before he flies back to Australia. Presumably, he needs another night sleep before he gets back to Australia. But this has been quite an interesting little toing and froing between himself and the government. He had applied directly to the ADF for permission to visit the troops in Afghanistan, and the reason why he did this was prior to his leadership, Malcolm Turnbull had wanted to set up a meeting in Afghanistan and went through the Prime Minister's office, and it took a good 2 or 3 months before that trip was approved. He didn't want to fall for that trap, but of course he got caught now because Julia Gillard was there a couple of days ahead of him, and we know what happened with that doorstop from hell where he suggested he couldn't make the trip with her because he needed his beauty sleep.
I think we know now, Barry, that Tony Abbott actually sought permission from the ADF to be embedded, and he pointed out that numerous journalists, Chris Masters and so on, have spent days with the troops in the field. I gather that the ADF knocked him back for various reasons, possibly to do with security. One can understand the need for a journalist to go out there and so on, but perhaps not a visiting politician. However, that was Abbott's desire, to actually spend some real time rather than just a meet and greet.
But then he asked to stay overnight, and they knocked him back on that as well.
Well, I don't think that these people, I mean, they're in an operational situation. He wanted more than a pick-fack, a pictorial opportunity, as the Prime Minister had, but this was all done before the Julia Gillard trip came along. Now, when he was rejected and they penciled in this date for him, which was this weekend, then the Prime Minister said, well, I'm going ride on my plane, and she released the detail that she had invited him and he had said no. But where he made the mistake, of course, was to say that he was worried about jet lag.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But surely to the troops on the ground there, visiting politicians are just a pain in the neck. Malcolm Farr had a piece where he suggested they said, "We'll take Jimmy Barnes, but we don't want politicians."
I think that's absolutely true. And actually, Miranda Devine has a piece today in which she said that the troops were pretty disappointed with Julia Gillard because, unlike John Howard when he was Prime Minister, when her jet arrived there, she didn't bring any mail. And in the Sunday Telegraph, Miss Devine says that some of these troops in Afghanistan were waiting for mail. They haven't seen a mailbag for 28 days.
But then, she'd been Prime Minister for 100 days, perhaps she wasn't aware of that practice. So wouldn't that be something that the department should advise her?
One would think so, but when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, he did ask the department, what would John Howard do in these situations?
Okay, now, Laura, the two gaffes, I guess. One was from Tony Abbott saying that he wanted to avoid jet lag, and the other from Julia Gillard saying that she hasn't got a passion for foreign policy. Do you think either of these will be sustained longer term as a difficulty for either one of them?
Well, I think they'll probably both be sustained for a while. People will throw the line at Julia Gillard. Realistically, it reminds me a lot of John Howard in his first term. He wasn't very interested in foreign policy, but probably wasn't quite so blunt about putting it out there. I think the Tony Abbott line will look bad. It'll probably, it sounds so ridiculous from somebody who famously campaigned for 36 hours straight at the end of the election campaign. I think the effects of going to Afghanistan will sort of ameliorate it a bit, but they're both basically klutzy lines from ill-plate leaders, I think, who've still got to get
with Tony Abbott, George, the secret seems to be keep him talking.
Just keep him talking, and then the Labor Party will be kicking themselves again when they look at this. All it takes is a couple of hours of attention on Tony Abbott, which they couldn't sustain during the election campaign, and out comes the old Tony.
Yeah.
Look, the difficulty here is that we're now seeing an extension of that election campaign, and that was the most god-awful election campaign I think any of us have seen in our professional memory.
Well, George, I think what we're seeing, in fact, is that Tony Abbott has stopped campaigning, and if he wants to restore the discipline that he showed during the campaign.
3 years is a long time.
That's right. But he's a marathon man, you know.
And I can imagine people around Julia Gillard saying, well, you were misinterpreted, just move on. But she'll have to do something, won't she, to persuade Australian history is committed to those very important aspects of foreign policy. Well, after all, you send troops to Afghanistan.
There was absolutely no way you could misinterpret what she said in response to that question. She did say that foreign policy was not her passion. And I think the other very interesting thing about that meeting, Barry, is if you looked at the group photos, the leaders who attended were all there with their foreign ministers. Why wasn't Kevin Rudd trailing along beside Julia Gillard and talking to his co-foreign ministers?
I think she'd rather travel with Tony Abbott.
And I think that's pretty true.
There's another story this morning, and the first in a series, really, about how the morale of the troops in Afghanistan have been affected by these charges being laid against three troops.
Well, that's correct. And this one was in the Herald Sun this morning. And it says that the blogs and the web posts that are being put up by the serving soldiers, and the words used here show unrestrained disdain for the Army's senior command. Now, this is over the decision by the Prosecutor General of the Army, Brigadier McDade, a woman who served as a reservist and was for 23 years, I believe, the Deputy Coroner in the Northern Territory, a woman with no military experience apart from her years in the reserve. And she is acting totally independently of the military command and of the departmental process in bringing these charges. And having read some of the blogs and so forth, I can see there is an enormous ferocity saying that this is an issue which, under the previous laws governing our troops, would have been handled within the military structure. And generally, a court-martial is brought and heard by serving officers, and it's not brought by an independent...
Australian troops can't be immune from this sort of thing, but there has been a very long delay.
There's been a very long delay, but I suppose I'd also just say, Piers, we've had really bad troubles with the military justice system in the past.
That's right.
And so, you know, this is a bit on training wheels now. We're in the process of reform.
I agree, Laura, and I think that what we've seen here, Barry, is that when they found that the previous system was unconstitutional, they kept elements of it. But it needed a root and branch reform to make sure it worked from the bottom up and the top down. And this one is a sort of a cherry-picked aspect of that, and I think that the response shows it's not going to work.